The battle was over until human Vanguard forces crashed through the surrender. Channel was already open when the sensors screamed. Commander Kale Sorvan stood at the damaged helm of the core Valeth and watched 42 pieces of wreckage drift slowly past the viewport. Each one had been a ship 6 hours ago. Each one had carried a crew. Now they were cooling metal in the orbit of HFY. And the Coderm Dominion was waiting patiently for Sorvan to finish the job. They had started for him. Warlord breath filled the forward screen. He was enormous even by Coderm standards. His hide layered with old battle damage that had sealed over the years into something like additional armor. His eyes were slow and heavy and had never once in all the reports Sorvan had read shown anything that looked like uncertainty. Commander Sorvan breath said, "I will not insult you by repeating the situation. You know what it is. Send your formal surrender within 30 minutes. I will then discuss terms for the colony on the surface below. If the timer ends without a response, I will not discuss anything." 3 officers remained on Sorvan's bridge. The rest were dead or at emergency stations throughout the ship. Ensign, 22 years old and the best sensor officer Sorvan had ever trained, was bent over his console with the focused look of a man trying to find something useful in a very empty sky. He found something. "Commander," I said. His voice did not carry the tone of a routine duty report. It carried the weight of someone who had just seen something they were not sure how to process. "I have contacts at the far edge of the system. They just came out of faster than light travel." "How many?" Soren asked. 47 ships. Ethan's fingers moved fast across the readout. "Commander, their transponders are not compact codes." A pause. "They are human." The word moved through the bridge like a cold current. Sorvan had met humans on several occasions, formal gatherings, diplomat events, the kind of meetings where everyone was careful and polite. He had found them energetic in a way that was sometimes exhausting and occasionally impressive. They had joined the Galactic Compact 81 years ago. Their military was considered capable but unproven at true interstellar scale. Compact strategists had noted privately that humanity had not yet fought a war that genuinely tested them. No one had sent for them. The distress signal from HFY had gone only to compact worlds within response range. None of them had forces to spare. No message had been transmitted to Earth, and yet 47 ships had just arrived. They had come out of faster than light travel, already at high speed. No deceleration, no spread, no pause to adjust to local conditions. They had entered the system in motion and were accelerating directly toward the Coderm fleet in a tight angled cluster that looked nothing like a recognized military formation, and everything like something thrown very hard at a specific target. Breath had stopped speaking. His eyes had shifted off-screen to wherever his tactical officers were stationed. He was receiving information. Sorvan watched him process it. "What are those vessels?" Verith asked, not to Sauron, to his own crew, then after a moment back to Sorvan, who called them. "No one," Sorvan said, before Breath could respond. A new signal opened across all active channels. The voice that came through was female, unhurried, and spoke as though the situation had been fully evaluated and a decision had been made some time ago. "This is Fleet Admiral Nora Clark, commanding the 7th Human Vanguard Fleet. I am broadcasting To all parties in the system, 11 days ago, our listening stations recorded the initial engagement at Edris 5. We departed immediately. We are here now. To the compact forces, hold your position. To the Coderm fleet, this engagement is no longer concluded. Breath responded without delay. Human Admiral, you command 47 ships, several of which my sensors show are already carrying hull damage from prior engagements. I command 60 warships at full capacity. I have destroyed every fleet the compact has sent against me. What outcome do you expect that is different from what has already happened? Here today, a pause brief, a different one. Clark said that is not an answer. No, she said it is a promise. The channel closed on the core vein. Stared at his console. The two other officers at the rear of the bridge had turned from their posts and were looking at the tactical display in silence. They are still accelerating, Ethan said. They are not spreading into any recognized formation. They are not taking a defensive posture. He looked up. Commander, they are flying directly at the Coderm main line at full engine output. Sorvan leaned forward and looked at the display. The 47 human ships were burning hard across the screen, moving in a way that was tight and deliberate and very fast. He had studied military engagements for 30 years. He did not recognize this approach. It had no name in any tactical record he had ever read. It looked more than anything else like a decision that had already been made and was simply being carried out. Warlord Breath on the forward screen was now speaking rapidly to someone off camera. His tone had changed. Not panicked, not afraid, but focused in a way that had shifted from the patience of a man collecting a surrender to something harder and more alert. Move gunships to intercept, Breath said. His eyes came back to Sorvan. Your surrender window is still open, Commander. Sorvan looked at the tactical display for a long moment. The human fleet was still closing. The distance was shrinking. Vast. Ethan, he said, sir, signal every ship that can still respond, every weapon that still works, bring them up. Ethan turned immediately to his console and began sending. The surrender window had 27 minutes left on it. Neither side was looking at the clock. The first exchange of fire between the Coderm gunship line and the human fleet lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. In those 4 minutes, Breath's gunships fired at maximum sustained rate into the oncoming cluster. It was the kind of fire that had shattered battle lines in 11 separate engagements across 4 decades of Dominion expansion. The light from it was visible on the surface of Edris 5. Civilians in the colony shelters, receiving no transmissions and hearing nothing but silence, saw the sky pulse and had no way of knowing what it meant. The human fleet did not break, spread, or slow. They flew through it. Lieutenant Derek Ash, weapons officer on the Thermopylae, called targeting data at a pace that left no room for anything except the work directly in front of him. He was 29 years old, had been in 2 prior engagements, both smaller than this, and had learned in both of them that the most dangerous thing in a fight was not incoming fire. It was the moment when your own mind stopped being useful to you. He had worked hard between those engagements to make sure that moment never came for him. It was not coming. Now, forward battery 1, target the lead gunship bearing 47, he said. Fire. On my mark. Battery 2 tracking the second vessel in the line. Stand by. Navigator Claire Owens was at the station. To his left, she had already calculated the course adjustment that would bring the thermopylae through the narrowest gap in the Codern gunship pattern and was feeding corrections to the helm in real time as the gap shifted with enemy repositioning. Gap is closing, she said. They are tightening it. How long do we have? Ash asked. 8 seconds. Mark Ash said. Battery 1 fired. The lead Codern gunship took the hit across its forward section and went dark. The gap opened by 6 degrees. That is enough, Clark said from the center of the bridge. Owens, take us through. The thermopylae drove into the gap at a speed that gave the adjacent Codern vessels less time to track and fire than their targeting systems required. 2 shots caught the hull. Anyway, the impacts were enormous. Emergency lighting activated on the port side. A damage control alert went wide across the ship's internal network. The thermopylae did not slow down. On the Corvelith, Ann and Ethan watched the sensor data and kept repeating the same words without fully meaning to. Still moving, he said. Still moving. The thermopylae took 2 direct strikes from Codern heavy guns, and it is still at full thrust. He turned from the console. Commander, a ship taking those hits should not be at full thrust. Sorvan said nothing. He was watching the display behind the thermopylae. The entire human fleet was performing the same action across the full width of the gunship line, not in sequence all at once. 47 ships had identified 47 gaps and points of least resistance and were driving through in parallel, accepting hits to maintain speed, refusing to stop and exchange fire at range where Codern weapons were most effective. When it was over, the gunship line was broken. 11 Codern vessels were destroyed. 4 more were disabled. The human fleet had lost 3 ships and carried heavy damage on 8 others, but the remaining 36 were through the line and inside the minimum safe engagement range of the Codern main battle formation, which had been built to stop enemies at distance and had not been arranged for close quarters fighting. Breath understood the problem. Immediately, he began issuing repositioning orders on the Fort Carson, a destroyer that had lost its starboard engine to a hit during the breakthrough. Captain Owen Grant was routing his last power reserves to the forward guns. The ship was flying at a severe list. Sparks coming from an exposed conduit above the helm. Half the displays dark. His crew of 41 was working in 3-person teams across every functional station, doing the work of 6. Grant, his first officer, Batelell, said from across the bridge, we are down to 40% thrust on the remaining engines. We can hold position in formation, but we cannot maneuver effectively. Then we hold position, Grant said. What still? Fires, forward battery port. Secondary 1 missile tube. Then we use those, Grant said. Keep us in line. 3 decks below, Sergeant Leonhurst was moving through a partially collapsed corridor on deck 7, leading a 6-person damage control team toward a hole breach that was venting atmosphere at a rate that would become dangerous in 11 minutes. The corridor was dark except for their suit lights. Debris blocked the path at 2 points, and they moved it by hand, fast and without discussion. Because discussion took time, they did not have. They reached the barrage. It was a 2-meter in the outer hall. Hurst assessed it for 4 seconds and pointed. His team moved without being told twice. They had trained for this. They had trained for worse. 7 minutes later, the breach was sealed. Hurst opened his communicator. Bridge on deck 7 is sealed. You have full atmosphere. Grant's voice came back immediately. Copy that. Stand by for boarding orders. We may be going across shortly. Hurst looked at the 6 people around him. They were covered in dust and sweat, 2 of them carrying minor injuries from falling debris. All of them looked back at him with the same expression. Ready, understood. He said, we will be ready. On the Corvail, Sorvan had positioned his 7 remaining ships at the edge of the engagement zone. Damaged, underpowered, and outgunned. But present, he was watching the human fleet tear through the outer sections of the Codern formation with a ferocity that appeared to increase with every hit. They absorbed as though damage was making them more aggressive rather than less. Commander, Ithrin said, his voice had changed. The fear had not left it, but something else had entered alongside it. The Codern are attempting to envelope the human fleet. They are repositioning to surround them on 3 sides. I see it, Sorvan said. The human ships are not retreating to avoid the envelope. I see that too. They are pushing further in. They are going deeper. Ethan stopped. Then, Commander, I think they are trying to reach the center of the formation. At the center of the CAD formation was the Eternal Dominion, Ver's command ship, the largest and most heavily armed vessel in the fleet. Sorvan looked at the display for a long, quiet moment. Then he opened a channel to his 7 ships, all compact vessels. This is Commander Sorvan. Advance to the engagement zone. All weapons active. We are going in. Behind him he heard Ithrin draw a short breath. Then he heard the Enon begin transmitting the orders without a second of delay. The Eternal Dominion was the largest ship Nora Clark had ever seen outside of a compact shipyard. It was 3 times the length of the Thermopylae, its hull plating layered in dense overlapping sections that the Cadron had been reinforcing and upgrading over 4 centuries of continuous military operation. Its weapons array alone, according to every tactical assessment Clark had reviewed before entering the Krellian Reach, carried enough firepower to disable a mid-sized fleet on its own. It was not just Breath's command ship. It was a statement. It was a declaration of everything the Cadern had been for 400 years. Clark was looking at it from less than 200 km away. Owens, she said, I see it. Clara, Owens said, can we reach it? Owens studied her display for 3 seconds. The gap between the Thermopylae and the Eternal Dominion was filled with 4 Cotton warships actively maneuvering to block any approach. Dominion itself was now firing on the human fleet directly, its main guns cycling slowly but landing devastating hits on anything they tracked. 2 human ships had taken critical strikes in the last 90 seconds. There is a window, Owen said. 11 seconds. 2 of the blocking warships have to pass each other to complete their repositioning. When they do, the angles on their guns create a dead zone that runs directly to the Dominion's port side. When does the window open? 4 minutes, give or take. Then we wait 4 minutes, Clark said. Ash, keep pressure on that lead warship. I want constant fire. Make it think we are going for it, not around it. Ash moved to the task without comment. 4 minutes in a battle is a long time. 3 decks below, Leon Hurst was receiving his boarding orders with the steady focus of someone who had decided what the situation required and was moving accordingly. His team was now 10 assembled from 3 damage control groups suited up and standing in the secondary airlock. We are attaching to the Codern destroyer on our port side. He told them, crew of roughly 80 by compact estimates. Our job is simple. We go in, we hold their attention, we keep them dealing with us and not with the fight outside. One of his team, a young soldier named Danny Cole, raised his hand slightly. Sergeant, there are 10 of us. Yes, Hurst said, and 80 of them, roughly. Hurst agreed. Danny Cole appeared to consider this. Then he nodded and said nothing further. Hurst had worked beside him for 3 years and knew that nod. It was the nod of someone who had decided the numbers were the numbers and that worrying about them was a waste of time. That could go towards something more useful. The airlock connected to the Codern destroyer's hull with a magnetic clank they all felt through their boots. Hurst checked the seal it held. Let's go, he said. What happened on board the Codern destroyer Velkrath over the next 6 minutes did not appear in any formal compact tactical report because there was no compact officer present to observe it. What did appear later in the written accounts of the 4 Codern crew members who survived the engagement and were eventually recovered was a description that the compact intelligence office would read 3 times before concluding it was not an exaggeration. The humans came through the hall in a controlled breach and moved without hesitation into a ship they had never entered before, with no blueprints, no crew position intelligence, no knowledge of the interior layout. They pushed toward the bridge at a pace that gave the defending crew no time to establish a proper defensive perimeter. They communicated constantly. They treated every obstacle as a problem with a 5-second solution, and they did not stop. The Velkracraft's crew was trained for ship-to-ship combat at range. They were trained to repel boarding actions by forces 2 or 3 times their own size. They were not trained for 10 humans who moved like they had somewhere to be and were only mildly interested in anything standing in their way. Hurst reached the bridge in 4 minutes and 14 seconds. 3 of his team had minor injuries. All 10 were present. The 12 Codern officers on the bridge looked at the humans who had just come through their door. There was a specific moment Hurst noticed clearly when the Codern crew made their calculation. They were larger. There were more of them. They were on their own ship. They did not look confident. Outside in the space around the engagement, Commander Sorvan had driven his 7 ships fully into the fight. They were not in good condition. The core veil could sustain full power for perhaps 40 more minutes before its backup cores failed. The other 6 ships were in similar or worse shape, but they were firing. They were drawing targeting attention, and in a battle that had come down to angles and focus, drawing attention had value. 2 Codern warships that had been moving to close the envelope around the human fleet had to redirect to deal with Sorvan's advance. That redirection opened a gap. Clarier Owens saw it the moment it appeared. She also saw that it was not the 11-second window she had been waiting for. It was smaller, 7 seconds angled wrong, which meant the approach to the Eternal Dominion would require a course correction at a speed not within the Thermopyle's rated performance envelope. She entered the correction anyway. Ash, she said without looking up. I see it, he said, already tracking. Clark, she said. Do it, Clark said. Thermopyle accelerated through the gap at a speed that broke the targeting lock. of 2 coder and fire control systems. Simultaneously, the course correction was sharp enough that 2 crew members in the rear of the bridge grabbed their stations with both hands. Owens held the angle through the turn with her eyes on the exit point and her hands moving with the precision that comes from running the same calculation in simulation enough times that your hands know it before your mind catches up. They came out of the turn with the Eternal Dominion directly ahead and nothing between them, and at 200 km then 100 then 50 on the Eternal Dominion. Warlord Breath stood at his tactical station and watched the human flagship come through a gap that his repositioning should have already closed. He had no word in his language for the precise sensation of watching something that should not be possible arrive anyway. Evasive, he said, it was the first defensive order of Breath had given 40 years of command. The Thermopylae closed the final distance and fired every forward weapon it carried. The hits landed across the Eternal Dominion's port hull in a spread that tore through 2 outer plating sections and detonated a secondary power relay. The explosion vented gases from the Dominion's port side in a wide cloud that briefly obscured both ships from external sensors. When it cleared, the Thermopylae was alongside the Dominion at a separation of 40 m, matching speed, exactly pressing in on the core. Valeth Ethan stared at his sensor display and forgot to report. He simply stared. The human flagship was pressed against the side of the largest warship in the Codern fleet at a range that was essentially nothing, and both ships were firing on each other at point-blank distance. The Thermopylae was taking enormous damage. Hull sections on both port and starboard sides were venting. Its forward engine pod had gone dark. It was listing slightly on its axis. By every technical measurement I could apply, the ship was approaching the edge of what it could survive. It was still firing. Nora Clark had moved to the front of the bridge, standing at the reinforced forward viewport with damage reports coming through an earpiece. She was looking at the Dominion's hull with focused attention, studying the plates and seams in the section closest to their position. Ash, she said, secondary hull port facing section 12. Do you see the seam in the plating? Ash pulled it up. I see it. That is where their internal troop compartments are, she said. Compact intelligence briefing, page 44. The command ship carries its reserve ground forces in that section. If that compartment is breached, Breath loses his boarding response capacity. The section is double-plated, Ash said. Yes, Clark said. Aim for the seam. Ash brought battery 2 to bear and fired a concentrated sequence at the exact line where the 2 plates met. The first shot widened the gap. The second detonated something inside. The third opened it completely. The Dominion shuddered along its entire length. On its bridge, Breath was receiving damage reports faster than his crew could prioritize them. His second Gra moved close and lowered his voice. Warlord troop compartment is breached. Reserve forces are in emergency seal protocol. They cannot be deployed. Then we fight with bridge crew. Vereth said the human ship is moving a boarding team to our hull. Gra said. Vereth looked at the display. It was true. The Thermopylae was repositioning a docking port toward the Dominion's damaged section. Breath had been boarded once before, early in his career on a raid. That went wrong. He knew what to do. Seal all internal bulkheads between Section 12 and this bridge, he said. Every corridor, every door, let them come in, let them exhaust themselves. Cutting through each layer, they will not reach us. It was a sound plan in any prior engagement it would have worked. He did not yet know about the Velkreth. Word of what had happened on that destroyer had not yet reached the Eternal Dominion because the Velkreftoff's communications were no longer functioning. 10 humans had taken control of a ship with 80 crew and 8 minutes, and the 4 Codern warships nearest the Velcro had spent precious minutes trying to understand why its transponder had gone silent and its engine output had changed behavior. Those minutes had been enough. In those minutes, Sorvon's compact ships had pushed fully forward. They were not in good condition. They were not by any honest military standard an effective fighting force, but they were there and they were firing, and every Codern vessel tracking a compact ship was not tracking a human ship. One Codern cruiser caught a combined salvo from 3 compact vessels. At the same moment, a human ship hit it from the opposite side. The combination exceeded what its shielding had been rated to absorb. It went dark. Sorvin watched it happen and felt something he had not felt in 6 hours. Not hope exactly, something earlier than hope, the thing that comes before hope when the data first stops pointing entirely in one direction. Ethan, he said, what does the board look like right now? Ethan ran the assessment for 10 seconds. Codern have lost 19 vessels, 14 destroyed, 5 disabled. The human fleet has 29 ships still operational at full or partial capacity. 29 against 41 remaining Codern vessels. The numbers were still unfavorable. But then I said something else. Commander, the Codern fleet is no longer advancing. They have stopped pushing outward. They are pulling inward toward the Eternal Dominion. A pause. A consolidated inward formation is a defensive posture. The Codern Dominion was defending. Sorvon had read every major Codern engagement in the last century. In 400 years of recorded conflict, the Dominion had never held a defensive formation in open space. They had been cornered on planetary surfaces twice in their early expansion period, but in open space against a fleet they had always advanced. They are protecting the flagship, Ethan said quietly. That was not what you did when you were winning. That was what you did when you were afraid of losing something you could not afford to lose. Signal all compact ships, Sorvon said. We push to the Eternal Dominion. We support the human fleet, every ship, every working gun, everything we have. Ethan sent the signal on the human ship still fighting, pilots and gunners and damage control crews who had been in continuous action for over an hour received the compact fleet's advance at the same moment in ship after ship across the entire human formation. People read that message and understood what it meant. They were not alone. They had never stopped fighting as though they were, but knowing it and feeling it were different things. Owen Grant, commanding the Fort Carson at a severe list on one working engine, read the signal and looked at Bait Lal across the dark bridge. Tell me we still have the missile tube, he said. We still have the missile tube, she said. Load it, he said. Point us at the Eternal Dominion. The Codern Dominion did not retreat all at once. It broke. It happened the way structural failures happen in large systems. At first, a single point of stress reached its limit, and then the failure spread along the lines. connecting everything else to that point, a warship on the outer edge of the Dominion's defensive formation, already heavily damaged, receiving no response to its requests for support, made a calculation and jumped to faster than light travel without orders, then 2 more, then 4 more at once. Warlord Breath, on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watched the departures register on the tactical display one by one. He had been in the middle of coordinating a response to the human team cutting through his hull sections. He stopped issuing those orders when the 3rd departure registered. The 4th and 5th appeared while he was still watching. Gra stood beside him and said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. The Codern military had no doctrine. For this moment, they had never needed one. The word for what was happening existed in their language only. Historical records describing other species' defeats, they had never applied it to themselves. Breath was applying it now. Set jump coordinates, he said. His voice was the same as it had always been, low, controlled, without any outward change. We leave. Gra sent the order. Eternal Dominion entered faster than light travel. 17 seconds later, followed by 14 other Codern warships that had stayed to the end. 22 others had already gone. 19 Codern vessels remained in the system, 3 adrift, 4 destroyed, and the rest simply silent, their crews surviving in sealed compartments. Their fight finished. The active battle from first contact to the final departure had lasted 2 hours and 9 minutes. Silence that followed was very different from the silence that had come before it. On the Thermopylae, Nora Clark stood in the middle of her bridge and read the damage reports cycling across every screen. She had been receiving them throughout the battle without showing any visible reaction to them. Now she read each one carefully from the top of the list. Deck 2 forward section, hull breach, sealed by repair team, port engine pod offline, estimated repair time 72 hours. 2 weapon batteries destroyed. Forward sensor array at 30% capacity. Crew casualties 11. She stood with that number for a full minute. Then she looked at Derek Ash, who was still at his station with the steady focus of someone who had not yet fully allowed themselves to stop. Stand down. Weapons, she said. Get me medical updates on all casualties. Yes, Admiral, he said. She looked at Claire Owens. Owens had not left the helm since the moment the battle started. Her hands were resting on the console now, no longer moving. She was looking at the same display Clark was. Good flying, Clark said. Owens turned. For a moment, she looked as though she was going to say something efficient and professional. Then she simply nodded. Thank you, she said. On the fort, Carson, Owen Grant had put his ship into a slow holding pattern near the remains of the engagement. The missile tube had been fired twice in the final minutes, both times at Codern vessels that had been maneuvering to target human ships. At close range, both had connected. Grant had not seen the results directly, because there had been other things to track at the time. Bait Lal had told him. Afterward, he had the damage report in front of him now and was reading it the same way Clark was reading hers, methodically, not avoiding anything. 3 crew members injured, none critically. The ship needed major work before returning to active service. Starboard engine was completely gone. The stabilizer array would need to be rebuilt from structural frame up, but the ship was there. The crew was there. He set the report down and looked out. The viewport at the debris field. Compact wreckage, cotton wreckage, and here and there the shapes of human vessels that had not made it through. He looked at those shapes for a full minute and thought about their crews. Then he went back to work because that was what needed doing next, and because the people he was thinking about would have said the same. 6 hours after the last Coder'n vessel left the system, a formal compact meeting was held on board the Corvée. The ship was the largest compact vessel still functional enough to serve as a gathering point, though it showed the evidence of the day in every corner. Sealed blast panels, temporary lighting running on auxiliary power, the persistent smell of burnt circuitry that had been contained but not yet cleared. Commander Cale Sorvon met Fleet Admiral Nora Clark at the docking port with his 2 remaining senior officers and the drill representative who had survived the battle in the protected lower sections of the ship. Clark came aboard with Derek Ashe and 1 other officer. She was in her standard fleet uniform and wore a sling on her left arm from a fall during a hull impact earlier in the engagement. She had declined transfer to the medical support ship. She had been on her bridge continuously from the moment the 7th Vanguard fleet entered the system. Sorvon looked at her for a moment before speaking. He was a being who chose his first words carefully and had spent 30 years in command learning that the first thing you said after a significant event set the tone for everything that followed it. Admiral, he said, I have been composing what I wanted to say to you for the last 6 hours. I have many things to address, but I find that the first question I want to ask is very simple. He paused. No one sent for you. No distress signal reached Earth. You came without authorization from the Compact Council, without orders, and without any guarantee that you could change what was already happening here. Why did you come? Clark considered the question. It was the one she had expected, and she had thought about how to answer it honestly during the same 6 hours Sorvon had been composing his words. Because you needed someone, she said, who had not yet decided it was too late. Sorvon was quiet for a moment, then he stepped aside and gestured toward the interior of the ship. Please come in, he said. We have a great deal to discuss. Formal petition was drafted the following morning. It was transmitted to the full Compact Council within the week and requested the creation of a permanent human Vanguard designation for the Outer Rim territories with command level authority over emergency military response in those sectors. It was the first time in the Compact's 400-year history that a member species fewer than 100 years into membership had been offered an independent command seat. The vote was not close. Humanity accepted. In the days that followed, Ann and Ethan completed a full tactical analysis of the engagement. He worked on it for 3 days using every analytical tool available in the Compact's tactical database. He ran the numbers 11 times because the first 10 results matched each other, and he was not yet ready to accept what they said. The results from a mathematical standpoint were not improbable. They were impossible. The human fleet should not have won. The force differential, the damage sustained, the tactical positions, the resource constraints at the moment of engagement. Every model predicted a human fleet defeat with a confidence rating above 94%. Every model stared at his completed report for a long time. He thought about what Sorvan had said to him during the battle when the numbers had looked their worst. He thought about Clark at the docking port, and what she had said. He thought about the Fort Carson flying at a 40 degrees list on one engine still in formation. He thought about Hurst and 10 people walking into a ship carrying 80 crew and coming out the other side of it. He saved the report. Then he opened a second file, wrote 2 sentences in it, and saved that separately. The 2 sentences said, "The models are not wrong. Humans simply have not learned to believe them yet." He closed both files and went to get some sleep somewhere in the Coder Dominion's command network. Database entry for the human species was updated that same night. Its threat classification was revised from Category 3, marked as an emerging civilization, to Category 9, marked as an unrestricted threat. There was no Category 10. The registry had never needed one before.